Hello and welcome. Today's Friday, April 10th, and it would be a B day if we were still in school. As has become my tradition on Fridays, I want to talk about reading, but we're going to do it a little differently. We've been talking about figurative language in regards to poetry, so it makes sense to talk about some poets. And I'm going to recommend a couple. Hopefully you'll be able to check them out, read some of their poems, and from there either gain a new appreciation for poetry or develop a little bit more of an ease for reading it. And let's start about how to read a poem. There's a couple of things here that you need to know. First, you have to read a poem more than once. Nobody can read a poem once and fully grasp what there is there. It takes multiple read-throughs, which usually isn't a problem because most poems on average are pretty short. Even I, in my ripe old age, in my, mid-40s, I still read poems multiple times. And every time I read it, I take something new out of it. And that's the first real step. When it comes to reading a poem out loud, you have to remember to pause where the punctuation is. And this can become a real difficult thing for students. I think the natural inclination when reading a poem out loud is to pause at the end of lines, which isn't the way you should do it. And sometimes when you do that, it creates kind of a weird, breathless choppiness to the poem. So try to read it naturally and try to stop or pause where there's the punctuation like you would when you read prose or, standard writing. So we're going to start with Robert Frost. Robert Frost was the poet laureate. He's our famous New Englander there who probably is the most ubiquitous poet when it comes to students learning about poetry in America. His poems like Mending Wall and The Road Not Taken, they've really become the cornerstone of American education with poetry, and for good reason. They're great poems. They give you that slice of American life, and I think because of the way they're written and their topics, they're the type of poem that people kind of find aspects that relate to their own lives. It's one of those things where you see something that connects to your life regardless of what your life may be. So definitely check out Robert Frost in those two poems, Mending Wall and The Road Not Taken. Now, from there, Sylvia Plath is definitely one you want to check out, and specifically one of my favorite poems of all time, Metaphors. This is one of my favorite poems because of the way it's written. Now, earlier in the week, I made a video on metaphor, and this poem, every single line in it has a metaphor. But the trick with this one is that the metaphors are all about the same thing. And what Sylvia Plath did with this was to try to build up with each metaphor and, in fact, every piece of the poem to lead you to think about something. Now, it's kind of a riddle, right? You have to really try to break down what each metaphor is about, but look at all the other pieces. Look at how many lines there are. Try to figure out how many syllables are in each line. And if you do that, you can start to piece together or parse out what the poem is about. And once you do, reread it again and you'll get another appreciation for the poem. So Metaphors by Sylvia Plath. Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson was a tremendous poet who had this kind of tragic piece. And when I say that, what I mean is for a long time, and I still hear it now, she got this reputation of being this crazy woman who locked herself up in an attic and wrote poetry. And I think a big piece of that is just due to just point blank sexism, right? She was a woman, so, we go back to that idea of hysteria, which has roots in feminine words, if you look up the definition of hysteria. And I think she was labeled that because she was a woman. And for a long time, I remember even when I was in middle school, my teacher making comments about, her having maybe some mental instability and so forth. And it was really striking, as I got older and learned more about Emily Dickinson, that, maybe that wasn't the case. She was an incredibly intelligent woman living in a time period where society was even less equal and I want to say free for women. So being an incredibly intelligent woman and understanding what should happen must have been incredibly difficult for her to have to deal with the reality of an incredibly male-dominated society. So, I mean, can you blame her for wanting to just stay in her house and write? She couldn't have any other real freedom. The only freedom she might have received was by expressing herself through poetry, which she did frequently. And the second piece of the tragedy here is that when her poetry was found after her death, and she died of, I believe, kidney issues, they found her poems, and she wrote in a very unique style with plays on punctuation and capitalization. The men who published it decided that, clearly because she was a woman, she made some mistakes. And they changed all of that. They added in punctuation. They fixed capitalization. And in doing so, really changed the art that she had created. And it took a long while to go back to her original work. And, I think there's something to think about in that. Nowadays, thankfully, you can find Emily Dickinson's poems as they were intended to be, with the punctuation the way she had written it, with the capitalization the way she had written it. And, definitely look at Because I Could Not Stop for Death, or I Heard a Fly Buzz By. Now, she never actually gave titles to her poems, so typically what happens is they use the first line of her poems for the title. But please, please, please check out Emily Dickinson. You'll see a lot of imagery, a lot of personification, and I think it's a must. I'm going to go now to Wilfred Owen for one specific poem, and that's Dulce et Decorum Est. And, this is a poem dealing with the horrors of war, specifically World War I, which inspired Wilfred Owen to write. And it's incredibly powerful due to the imagery that he uses. And I think that when you read it and you look at it, it really does a wonderful job of putting you into the chaos of World War I and how horrific it must have been with gas attacks and so forth. So Dulce et Decorum Est is another incredibly powerful poem to read. I want to leave you with a short poem by myself. And, I'm not making any claims about how good it is, but this poem is a riddle. And, if you could try to figure out what it means, leave what you think the answer is in a comment or email me, and we'll see who can get it. Now, again, I'm not saying it's good, but try it. Read it over a couple times and see if you can get what the riddle is. The race is on. The 3 contestants run round the circular track. The tallest of the 3 always has the lead. Fast is he. The shortest is always behind. The others lap him often. Patiently plods he. The middleman cares not. He just counts the minutes. So that's my little poem. Hopefully you have a great weekend. Please be good. And, hopefully this weekend I can put out a short little video with some drawing, talking about how I do that. I can get to some of the things that students have requested over the last couple of weeks. I know there is a very patient student expecting a raptor drawing, and I promise you I will get to that. Until then, please be good. Bye.